Hey guys, welcome back. So now we're getting into the Joker conclusion, which really feels like a conclusion after the conclusion, with issue 15 only telling us a little bit more than 14, but nonetheless we gotta talk about it because this one wraps up the series. So if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch us spills every week, and don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squad up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so with getting into the conclusion, we jump back in with Jim Gordon, who's made his way back to Gotham and back to his apartment just after his daughter Barbara told him the two words, "he knows," which right there let Jim know that he had to get home, pour a couple drinks for himself, because Jim knew when Batman got there, he was gonna have a lot of explaining to do, because at this point, Batman's only aware that Jim has been hired to kill the Joker, in addition to a few other details. So from here, Jim's gotta fill Batman in about how everything played out, as well as how it truly ended, which is the part that we're still waiting on. So with this one, it's gonna be much like what we had seen when Jim was talking to Chief Detective Hallows, when we went through the narrative of what he remembered and what he wasn't telling Chief Detective Hallows. But in this case for Jim, he's starting from the top, and unlike the experience that we'd seen with Interpol, Jim is telling Batman everything. But with Batman getting here and asking Jim, where's the Joker? Jim, of course, has been through a lot, so he's got to decompress. Plus, it's the conclusion after all, and James Tynion has to run the clock. But it works out for us because it kind of gives us a recap of everything that's happened before we get down to how this really ended. But with Jim having this talk with Batman, it reminds him of one of their first conversations about the Joker. And even though Jim expresses that he can't remember their exact first conversation, but at this point, the conversation that he remembers most vividly is one that Jim had had with Batman on a snowy rooftop. Earlier on, when Jim had believed that the Joker was going to be somebody that they would catch, throw in Arkham, and just forget about. But with Jim not remembering the fine details of this conversation, he does remember that at the time, Batman had gone head to head with the Joker at least once, and even then Batman knew that he was up against something different. And it was that night that Jim had noticed a wariness in Batman that he hadn't seen before. And even now with Jim looking back, he noticed that things had never been the same since that night. But with Batman asking Jim, where's the Joker? Jim tells him that he honestly doesn't know. And after that, when Batman asks Jim if he killed the Joker, Jim tells him in the beginning that's exactly what he was hired to do, and he admits that the reason he didn't come to Batman at first is because he didn't know if he wanted to be stopped. And Jim admits that from then till now he had a number of opportunities to kill the Joker, both indirectly and directly. But before jumping into the details, Jim tells Batman that they've known each other a long time, and because of that, Jim deserves the opportunity to at least be able to explain himself. But even with Jim saying this, you can tell that Batman's patience is wearing kind of thin, because 70% of this issue is a long-winded answer to a yes or no question, which again I can understand because it gives us a refresher because a lot has happened. So for us, most of this is like Jim giving us a summary of what's taken place in addition to filling us in on how it actually ended. But to start this off, Jim asks Batman if he's familiar with the network, and Batman admits that he's heard rumors and he's brushed up against edges of it in his work, but for him that's as far as it goes. And it's here where Jim tells Batman that today their organization is gonna start to fall apart in their hands, which then has Batman like, alright Jim, what'd you do? And so it's here where Jim tells Batman that he had met their main scientist, who was a legit mad scientist, but he had revealed with the network making clones, they were trying to create a new generation of costume villains that they would be able to control. Because the network, they see the battles between costume heroes and villains as something that's useful to them, because for the longest time it's distracted the heroes from the work that the network has been doing in the shadows for the most richest and depraved people. And Jim goes on to tell Batman that for the last couple of decades, the network has spent that time luring the most dangerous costume criminals to these different little resort spas where they can stay off the radar of both heroes and the authorities. And on top of that, they have amassed the DNA of some of the most dangerous people on the planet so that they could splice together and create these monstrosities that would be conditioned to follow their orders. And it's here where Jim goes on to tell Batman about Vengeance, because like we'd seen, she's a product of this science, which originated with the network and later was used by the leaders in Santa Prisca. But as Jim continues, he tells Batman how Vengeance is a clone of Bane, as well as how capable she is, and he tells Batman just imagine someone like her programmed to kill a city's hero, or imagine someone like her just unleashed, and while she's wrecking everything and causing chaos, the network is just using this distraction so that they can continue to carry out their work. But even with Jim saying this, we still don't know how many other clone concoctions are out there, who may be a copy of one or even multiple heroes or villains. And on top of that, with these multiple labs having been destroyed, we still know that someone out there still has their hands on some of these samples. But after talking about vengeance and the cloning program, Jim then goes on to tell Batman about Cressida Clark, because without her, Jim would have never known about any of this. Because Cressida is the one who had set these recent events in motion. Like, it really started with her, because for Cressida, for the longest time, she's wanted to take down the network and the Court of Owls. And mainly because, like we'd seen before, she was doing this in order to get revenge on the organization that cast out her father and destroyed her life. And with Cressida having all this sensitive information about the network and the Court of Owls, as well as her motive to seek revenge, this is what led her to take all of this to Bane, who had known her father before. But with Cressida telling Bane about vengeance, this is why they framed the Joker and caused the whole 8-8 incident so that they could cover their tracks and move freely. But also with doing this, Bane was hoping that he would draw out his daughter, Vengeance. And Jim goes on to tell Batman that this is where they brought him in, because they needed someone who could put together the larger mystery and expose the network. And to get Jim to do this, all they had to offer him was money and the Joker's head. And even now, Jim admits that he's not proud that it actually worked. Like, they knew exactly what they needed to do to wheel him in, and he went for it. So of course, like we'd seen, Jim went on to hunt down the Joker, but with doing so, in the process, he was unaware that he was actually uncovering the network. But then Jim goes on to say that it wasn't until he was in Belize where he got an up-close look at the Joker's frustration because a target got put on his back, and the Joker wanted to know why. And at this point, Jim, he wanted to know too, because if the Joker actually did this, he wouldn't lie and say that he didn't. But then it's here where Jim asks Batman if they can go to the roof, because he feels like he's a bit more honest up there where he can see the city, and it's on their way up there where Jim then continues the story. And he goes on to say that at some point the Joker had figured out that the network had taken some of his DNA and that they were going to use it to create Jokers that they could control and weaponize. And Jim tells Batman that he'd seen some of these experiments himself, these gruesome and failed experiments. But like we'd seen, the Joker had set up for Vengeance to find the truth about herself in the lab in Paris, which at the time is what led to Vengeance going off the rails. But nonetheless, this led to what Cressida wanted, with the lab getting burned and being destroyed, and it also fed into what Bane wanted, with Vengeance learning the truth. And for Jim, the way he looked at it, the job was just getting done. It didn't matter how, or even if it was a coincidence, until later when he found out that Bane was a part of this, and then from there he really didn't look at much of this as any coincidence. But then it's here where Jim goes on to tell Batman, after he found out that Bane was involved, that it was around this time where Barbara got in over her head alongside with Julia Pennyworth. And it's from here where Jim tells us something that we don't know, because from here forward it's new info, because we kinda got left hanging from issue 12 when Jim made a deal with Bane and Cressida for them to let Barbara and Julia go back on his plane with Harvey Bullock, to where Cressida agreed, but she told him they had to take the Talon with them, which they did. But like we'd seen, Cassandra Cain was still there, and she attacked the Talon as soon as he got on the plane. And if you know anything about Cassandra Cain, you already know that she gets down. But of course with this happening, this wasn't any regular Talon. And as it turned out, in this moment we actually got the reveal that it confirmed Barbara's suspicions from issue 9, when she identified the Talon who had attacked her in the clock tower to be a DNA match for her deceased brother, James Gordon Jr. And it's from here where we find out through Jim that Barbara had taken James back with her to Gotham, while also telling him that she's gonna try and fix him and bring him back for real. And then just after this, we pick up from the cliffhanger that we were given in issue 14, when Cressida, Jim, and the Joker went inside the safe room to get away from Vengeance. But with doing this, they were then trapped in a room with Vicky and Sawyer Sampson, which you would think would be kind of a out of the frying pan into the fire kind of thing with the Sampsons, but Jim just ended up knocking out Sawyer while he was going for the Joker, and that was about it. And from there, they just tied up Sawyer and Vicky. But then it's here where the Joker asked Jim to pick up where he left off with that story, when Jim was younger and the old cop told him to aim for the head. But this time, instead of putting the gun back to the Joker's head, Jim tells the Joker that he's gonna wait here for the media to show up so he can tell them the truth. And after that, he tells the Joker that the Joker is going to help him find all of the resorts that he's visited over the years. But then the Joker lets Jim know, like, the plan sounds great and everything. Like, I imagine the Joker would love to show Jim around and show him all the resorts. But it's here where the Joker tells Jim that the plan sounds nice, but if he wanted to keep the upper hand, he probably shouldn't have put the Joker in a safe house in Texas that just has guns everywhere. And this is the moment that turns the situation on his head, because it's here where Joker tells Jim to put his gun down, nice and easy. And it's here where the Joker's like, who am I gonna kill? I gotta kill somebody. And first he considers Sawyer and Vicky Sampson, but then he's like, no, cause they're about to lose everything and he wants them to live and see that. But from there he looks at Cressida and Jim, And at this point, he's on the fence deciding if he should go for the person who set him up and put a target on his back, or should he go for Jim, who the Joker had thought was starting to learn how things worked at this point. But instead, like Jim said before, he's going to the media and to the authorities, and the Joker's really just tired of that same old loop. But then it's here where Jim tells the Joker if he wanted to kill him, then he would have done it a long time ago. And with hearing this, the Joker, he agrees. So he then starts to make his way out of the room. But then just before he leaves the room, he stops like, oh yeah, I almost forgot. Like I said, somebody's gotta die. And the Joker turns around and he shoots Cressida. And it's really a shocking moment because you would think that the Joker would have just left. But nope, unfortunately, he's a man of his word. But before Cressida passes, she sends Jim the money that she'd promised. And though it's not the full amount and we're not told exactly how much, but she tells Jim that it's enough to keep the fight going. And just before she goes, she tells Jim to promise her that he'll tear it all down. And in response, he tells Cressida that he'll do everything in his power. But after this, Jim tells Batman that he went to Isabella and Interpol because he didn't want to get the American authorities involved because there's a good chance that the network has him on payroll. But aside from that, Sawyer Sampson, he's given up all kind of details on everybody because he's old and bitter enough to throw everybody under the bus. And like we'd seen before with Vengeance and Bane, they made their way to Santa Prisca to tear down their cloning facility limb from limb. And aside from that, the Joker, he's in the wind. But with seeing Jim tell Batman all the details, from here, we do see him keep in touch with both Isabella and Harvey Bullock to keep the progress moving on shutting down the network, but also Jim calls Barbara to tell her that he'll help to try to get James Gordon Jr. to a place of some type of normalcy where he can have the chance of having a future. And after this, we then see Jim Gordon go back inside and go to bed, and for the first time in a long time, sleep soundly without being kept up at night thinking about the Joker. And I mean, it would be messed up if the Joker crept through the window and was like, oh, forgot one thing, Jimbo. But no, it's not that kind of story. But nonetheless, I will say it was a very interesting and unexpected ending, with us going through a ton of twists just to get here. But also, I'll say, as far as this Joker series as a whole, for me, the ride was a lot more fun than the destination. And I'll leave it at that. But I'm curious to know what you guys think in the comments. And before we go, I want to give a special shout out to our new patrons, Robert A. and Aaron V. Special thanks to you guys and all the patrons for supporting the channel. And for anyone who's new here who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below to where you can go to patreon.com/dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.